This is Museum Backstage, where we pull the curtain wide open on the hidden world of museums, galleries, and cultural spaces. If you think museums are only about quiet halls and priceless objects, think again. Behind the scenes is a world of high-stakes decisions, creative problem-solving, and people who keep culture alive against the odds. You will hear bold voices, untold stories, and fresh perspectives that challenge how we see preservation, power, and the future of collections. Here is your host, Samantha Hunt-Durán.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Museum Backstage. Today we're behind the scenes with a museum professional and textile specialist whose decade-long career has taken her from Dior's global exhibition to archives, collection spaces, and creative studios all around the world. She specializes in fashion collections, fur and leather preservation, and bringing new life to antique textiles through her artistic practice and her business, Bustle Worship. Today, she's the owner of Bustle Worship, where she creates sacred adornment from salvaged material and consults on fashion preservation and exhibition work. And when she's not working, she's in the studio co-creating new projects with her art partner or partner, which I love, reading, or enjoying her newest role as a mom. With that, say hello to my one very good friend, two, one of my most respected colleagues, and three, my next guest, Jensina Endresen.
Hi.
Hello, Jensina.
I'm so excited for your new project and podcast. Thank you for having me on.
Oh my gosh, thank you for taking the time in probably one of the busiest times of your life and the busiest to record this.
It's good.
I really
Keeps us out of trouble.
Yeah, that's right. Otherwise, we'd be out doing who knows what on the mean streets. Well, today we're going to talk broadly about fashion collections being more than just clothing, but archives of memory, identity, and cultural storytelling. And we'll touch on the power of fashion collections, and we'll go behind the scenes, I can tell myself, the logistics and fashion exhibitions, and talk about business ownership and creative reinvention. And those who stay on at the very end will hear Jensina's hot takes on sustainability in fashion. How does that sound to you, Jensina?
I'm super excited. Let's get into it.
Let's do it. Let's dive right into the first question. What makes clothing and textiles fundamentally different from other museum items?
I think that clothing is something that is so unique and personal to every person. It's also something that you wear on your body. So it's something that you're not only actually enveloping yourself in, it's something that you touch and that you move through the world in. So I think that clothing as an object is already something that we feel very familiar and is very personal to us. And put in the fact that a lot of museum collections have items that are handmade or specialty made or one of a kind. I think that there's something very unique in that way, that it's an object that we're not just looking at. It's something that we're using in everyday life, and it's tactile.
Yeah, in my early kind of museum days, didn't think about clothing in museum collections. When I thought of collections and I was at an art museum, so I would think sculptures and paintings. And the first fashion exhibition, it was more jewelry exhibition that I heard of, was the Cartier exhibit. That kind of blew my mind. That was in Denver Art Museum. Woof, I don't know. I'll have to put a link to that show, but many years ago now. And that really impressed me because A, jewelry, but B, like things that you wear and adorn your body. Not something I was used to seeing in like a modern show. Then what really blew my mind was the Dior exhibition. We met each other because I never seen an exhibition just of clothing.
Yes. And I grew up in Iowa, so going to museums was not necessarily part of our childhood practice. So the first really professional high-end exhibition I saw was actually at the Des Moines Art Center, and it was a Halston and Warhol exhibition. And I remember seeing Jackie Kennedy's fur hat. And it was really interesting to me because that was the first time I had seen clothing exalted and exhibited in this way, where it was showing a larger part of, in this case, American and art history. It was showing that the hat had a place, had a story behind it, had a nuance, had all of these kind of political, social, economic, gender ideas behind it that made it not just an object with a story, but an object with a layered story that had also been on a person's body.
And someone who has this kind of mystique and just such a
Yeah.
personality. You have alluded to this, but how do you think that fashion archives and collections tell stories that objects like painting and furniture can't?
So I think that clothing is such an interesting kind of place marker in history because it not only shows you what was popular or what wasn't popular, whether it was a handmade garment. A lot of more local history museums will have things that are handmade, that have a personalization. And I think that it tells a story not only of the cultural macro environment, but of the micro environment of the person who made it or wore it. So the seams inside, the way that certain parts wear, like your elbows or the interior of your collar, all of those things are so personal to a person that they really tell an expansive and very small story that I think other objects, like a painting, don't always do.
And I think when I talk to people who don't often go to museums or like maybe have gone to a museum once as a field trip and talk about fashion collections or clothes on display, people, when they talk about paintings, are like, oh, I don't know, like what to think or how to feel, and I feel weird. But people approach clothing on display differently. They really gravitate toward it because you understand, even if it's not your style, it's all the
Mhm.
thing that someone wears. And I wear clothes every day. And so it's a bit more of a connection.
I love that. I also have a friend who at one point said something about their transition of being an architect into being a person who made clothing and bags. And they said that wearables are soft buildings. And I thought that was such a fascinating thing because buildings are this thing that we encase ourselves in or step into for an area of refuge, right? Like an area to be safe and warm or to be in a certain mindset or headspace. And I just think that idea of the wearable building is something that is really fascinating.
That is a really cool perspective and reminds me of when we were participating in that Dior exhibit, for instance, 'cause that's
Mhm.
the only fashion kind of exhibit that I've been a part of. And thinking of, and we'll get to the logistics of fashion exhibitions in a minute, but the idea that to display these pieces, you have to build the form to the garment as
Mhm.
if were the body that garment was made for.
Mhm.
And I'm remembering the Audrey Hepburn form for her, I think it was Yves Saint Laurent dress, and that
Mhm.
you'll have maybe more insight into this than I did, but I had heard that there were no forms small enough
Mhm.
that dress because of just structurally how her skeleton and the soft tissues were on her body.
Her and Natalie Portman, just teeny, teeny, tiny. So, yes, a lot of times it's about the addition of, and in those cases, it was about subtraction, which is a whole nother part of mannequinage or mount making that is a skill set and also a totally different world.
And something that struck me when you see all those different forms, especially in an exhibit where it's like couture design, so they were made for a specific person. And when they're all together and they were all made for different people, you can see all the different body types. Like to me, it just stands out even more without seeing it worn on a person. Oh, this person was much taller than this other person, and this person was clearly like much stronger than this. Whereas
Yes.
on the Audrey Hepburn form, it's so striking of like you get a sense of the body that it was made for.
Mhm. And even that also is a cultural marker, right? When you look at the body type of 1950s post-war people versus 1980s supermodels who were way more curvaceous, who had more sport and athletic bodies. And then back again in the 90s when there was more of a press towards that heroin chic. And just the way that all the different dresses are telling a story again about the cultural practice of clothing and attitudes around usually female bodies during that time.
Oh, that's really cool. It is the microcosm to the macrocosm.
Yeah.
So we've alluded to this a little bit about the logistics of fashion exhibitions and how those are
Mhm.
a little bit nuanced and unique, at least from my point of view.
Yeah.
Could you walk us through what it actually takes to mount a major fashion exhibition from mannequinage, the word that you used before, to object prep to the very end?
Yeah, so mannequinage is a term, a French term that means building the body. And as you said before, all of the dresses are a different size because they were all couture, meaning they're handmade for the particular person who ordered them or the model that was wearing them. So all of the mannequins are a single size because they're made in a factory. So there's two types of mannequins. There's a more plastic or fiberglass mannequin, and then there's also a soft form, which we often think of as a dress form. Usually it does not have a head, though it can. Stockman forms, they're fabric based, so you can sew into them. So there's kind of two approaches to mannequinage, depending on the mannequin that you are using. And as you said before, it's this kind of backwards thinking where instead of saying, I'm going to put the dress on the mannequin and go from there, you do start that way, but you then have to think about how to build that body to fill out the dress. And that's for a couple reasons. Visually, to make it look as though a person is actually wearing it. And you probably know more and could speak more to this, but from a conservation perspective, you have to be able to hold up the piece itself in order for it to be supported, similar to how you wouldn't want to hang a spaghetti strap dress on a hanger that had intense embellishment or heavy decoration on the bust, because gravity is going to pull that down. So fashion exhibitions are only up for 6 months or so because that can only hold up, and light-wise, it can only be exposed for a certain amount of time. I digress because I
No, the preservation part is important. Yeah, I can
Yes.
thank you too, because textiles are some of the most light sensitive collections out there because of the colored dyes. These dyes are not as steadfast, quote
Mhm.
unquote. It means they're more susceptible to fading over time than like other types of colors, like paint colors. Yeah, it's important when we're thinking, at least from the preservation side, what kind of light are we using? How often is it on? What types of ways are there to barrier her against like direct light? How much light does someone actually need to safely move through the space and
Yeah.
enjoy the exhibits? And yeah, to your earlier point of supporting, like thinking through structurally, how is this item created and what are the weak points? Where are the stress points? Is
Mhm.
there something heavy? Is there a huge embellishment that's going to pay
Mhm.
off and sag over time? Yeah, there's a lot that goes into even just, like, that part, and that's not even, like, the fun mannequinage world. That's
Yeah.
thinking through the preservation. So, we've talked about building the form and the different types of forms. We've talked about the elements that go into that. What about once it's installed? What Do they set it and forget it? Or is there a little bit of effort that goes into once they're even just there?
Yeah, so most of the things that you're using to build that body underneath are going to be fiber as well. So you're using batting, which is similar to, or it's what you would use inside of a quilt to make it padded and have some density. Shoulder pads are also used to create a more natural curve, whether it's on the bust, on the hips, or on the butt of a dress. And then there's also tool or to make petticoats, horsehair to add a stiff layer to it. So all of those things, because they're also fiber, they're susceptible to kind of droop or fall. So there's a lot of fluffing or crimping of the garment in between show hours so that you are steaming it. You're making sure that some of that padding is still nice and voluptuous and having some natural curve to it as opposed to getting bumpy, and steaming the skirts so that they're still very full, sometimes with like a water-based steamer so that you have some moisture to keep it up. And then again, you would make sure that you're checking light levels, checking to make sure that it hasn't been bumped, that any of the mannequin stands aren't touching it. There's a lot of minute details to look after.
Something I remember doing is coming in early before open hours to vacuum.
Mhm.
And it's like,
Yeah.
especially in the first gallery, it was all just like black
Yeah.
garments, and we were in Denver, so it's just dusty and dry. So
Yeah.
every day you would just see, and like it wasn't oftentimes it wasn't dust from being in a dirty environment. It was fibers from people's clothing as they were coming through because it was
Yeah.
from, I feel like all the exhibit was wintertime. You would see people like wool coat fibers or just feathers and down jackets.
Yes.
These things. So we would vacuum those off. And something I remember, I can't remember the lending institutions that had these stipulations, but some of the long dresses, like the red carpet dresses that had train, we
Mhm.
had to make sure the train was just when we had a reference image of that lending
Oh,
institution saying,
yeah.
this is how the train is supposed to be. We had
Yes.
to check, like,
Yeah. Totally. And when you're doing the mannequinage from the house, you're getting all these images of this is the runway vision. This is when the person it was made for wore it. These are other photos of it, and this is how it should look. Especially with couture pleating, that's something that has to be extremely precise. Talk about architecture and buildings wide. The sharpness of lines, making sure that you have things just so. All of that needs to be taken into account both when you dress the mannequin and later when you are mitigating any issues of wear throughout the exhibition.
something I'll say too is I was noticing in that fashion exhibition in particular that we had a lot more like mannequins shifting around. I think because people were
Mhm.
seeing what they could reach because it's clothes. Like we touch clothes.
Yes.
Time it's not a big all painting, and you're like, oh, I know I like shouldn't touch it. At least I don't know statistically if this is true, but I had the impression that things were moving around like every day.
Yes.
More
And
than normal.
absolutely. And I think that kind of harkens back to our previous conversations that we're so familiar with the idea of clothing that there is this sort of barrier that we don't have in relation to fashion collections because it's a familiar object and also just the tactile. I don't think that we have it in our vernacular at this point to not touch it. As you said, to not touch a sculpture or a painting, but there's something about clothing that we want to know. Is it soft? Is it scratchy? Is it synthetic? How it's our primal urge as humans to learn about things by touching them.
Oh, yeah. That's part of why I think a lot of collections people get into collections is to
'Cause
be
you
able
get to be behind the scenes and you're like, "Look at what I got to touch." I'm not supposed to, but I am actually.
I totally agree. I think humans are really tactile creatures, and it made a lot of sense to me coming in the morning every day and be like, man,
Yes.
You like touching these things.
And that's a funny misconception or behind the scenes thing is that depending on the textile itself, there's this idea that you're supposed to use the white glove treatment, which is true in some cases. But the reality of clothing is when you're dressing a mannequin, you have to have clean hands that have no nail polish or rings or any jewelry on, because the point is that you want to be able to lift or test and make sure that there are no weak spots.
And you can do that when you have a barrier, like that sense goes away. Like you can feel maybe weight, but like all this other information that
Yeah.
you don't get from gloves. It's the same with paper conservation as well. Most paper conservators, unless in like really strange instances or kind of unique cases, are going to use clean ones as well.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah. And so we get to touch things, and it's allowed. So once an exhibit has been up for what, 6 months, whatever it is, what is the deinstall?
So I am an agent of chaos and I love the deinstall because I think there's something really unique in the teardown that the exhibition is this lead up and this kind of anxiety about having everything meticulous and having everything in the right place and according to the book. And the deconstruction and the deinstall is fascinating because it's everything in reverse, but also you have to pack the dresses to go to bed, we would say. So there's these giant crates, and each of the dresses or outfits has their own drawer within the crate, and you pack the piece similar to Mannequinage, where you're supporting it with acid-free tissue paper and batting, and you're making sure that the objects themselves are supported for transport. And there's also my left brain registrar background really loves the organization part, where in the middle of all this chaos and melee and shutting down of the experience, you're also having to remember where things go and how to put them in their correct boxes and cages and doing condition reports and tearing down the stage. So if there's any artwork involved or any carpets or any build outs that have been done, you also have to tear those down and refresh and put everything to bed and give a clean slate back to the museum.
Or and in my impression, deinstalls have a tighter timeline than inst.
Yes. Yes.
Even though it's like theoretically the same amount of work, you don't have the like cerebral work of the aesthetic like vision of making sure
Mhm.
arranging that way, but you have pretty much the same amount of physical and I would say mental work in terms of keeping track of everything to your
Yeah.
point, condition reporting it because it's been up for 6 months and also getting ready to pack to ship to who knows where, sometimes international. It's and on
Mhm.
a tighter timeline.
Yes. Usually an install can take anywhere from I've done 3-week installs, usually not fashion-based, they take longer than that, but I believe that the first Dior exhibition in Denver, it took maybe 2 months to set everything up, and that's just the physical dressing of the mannequins, not to mention all of the shipping and the condition reporting and the years of curation that led up to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Because didn't even talk about all of the decisions, lending, curatorial, just insurance,
Yeah.
shipping, which is you said that all happens on either end.
Ye
Yeah, it really does take a village to put on,
Mhm.
especially a high profile fashion exhibition.
Yes.
So I know from that Dior exhibition that we've been mentioning, you continued to work with Dior
Mhm.
on installations around the world. Can you tell us more about how that started to happen and what that involved?
Yeah, I had never worked on a fashion exhibition or in museums proper before being on that show. And I got into it because I have a background in fur and leather preservation. And the curator at the time, Florence Miller, is a French woman who the French love fur. So it's not as a hot button issue as it is in the States or was at the time. Making a comeback, really pumped about it. But there was this background that I had that led me to apply to be a temporary exhibition install help for that show. And I was super nervous. I had never worked in museums before, and I just fell in love with the whole process. And I was very anxious the first couple days, very nervous. And my partner actually, I came home one day and was like, I don't know if I could do this. I feel way in over my head. And he said, just take it as an opportunity to be curious and ask these people who are from the house all of the questions you want to know, because just like you, they're excited and passionate about what they do, and people want to talk about what they love. And he was right. And I just asked a ton of questions. And also, I know that feeling of being new or traveling and being out of sorts. So I just asked them, what do you need? What do you want to see when you're here? So I made friends with the team from Paris and went on a couple of really silly field trips and took them around Denver and also said, here's where you should eat. Here's the best thrift store shopping. Here's all these things. And we formed a relationship, a friendship. And from there, when another opportunity came up to do a show in New York, they asked if I was interested to fly to New York and work on the show there, because it was someone that they knew had the skill set, that was already trained in the way that they wanted things done, and someone who was interested in creating relationships with teams, whether they be from the home office or from New York or from the museum. So that rolled into not just working on Mannequinage for the Brooklyn Museum show, but then working the de-install as a project manager for them and working more closely with the museum, working closely with the shipping international like fish and wildlife committees to figure out how to ship certain furs and pieces that had exotic feathers on them. And then there was a show in Doha. It was going to be the first show in the Middle East. And again, I had the skill set. It was 2021, so it's still COVID times. There were some people who were not interested in traveling during that time. And I just took every opportunity that was handed to me for those couple years and continued to work on the relationships and the skill sets and build continued relationships with the people on that team who are still friends of mine to this day.
It goes to show the power of being a connector like you are. Because we met during the behind the scenes of that Dior install that we're talking about in Denver. Which, when I met you, I had no idea that you had never been in a museum, like working in a museum behind the scenes before, because you were so like ingrained as part of the team. And I'll say team, so we have alluded to this fact, but I should explain that when we're talking about like the Dior team and the house, it's the French people, well, or they're not all French, but most
Yeah.
of our French people from Dior that came because Dior was lending quite a bit of pieces in that show. And so they were coming as the experts, like subject matter, but also as that's their collection. And so it was, and are they in the atelier too, like some of them?
Some of them have worked in the atelier, but the majority of them were working as archives consultants. So one of them, Justine, is in charge of the archives if a celebrity borrows a 1955 gown and wears it for a photo shoot. She's the person who will travel with that piece and knows its history and knows how it can and should be taken care of. Yeah, so some of them are archives. Amelie started out as a bookbinder, and then that skill set of the fine motor skills translates really well to mannequinage. And then Julian had worked in the atelier for many years, so he transitioned into the exhibition team. And then Ellen is the head of special exhibitions and projects for the cultural aspect of the Heritage House.
Oof. And when we say atelier, that means the people who make the clothes. I say that to give some context because we, as people in the museum in Denver, were all nervous because we're like, "Oh, having the French on
Yes.
And there was this kind of trepidation about what it was going to be like to work with that team. on these pieces that are so high profile. So many of them are red carpet, like Rihanna dress, just like all these Natalie Portman and
Mm.
Audrey Hepburn and just crazy famous dresses that everyone has seen. And so when I saw you in your element with that team, because that's how I met you, is you were just like in it with them. I didn't see you on your nervous couple days.
I mask it well.
I didn't see that at all. And I was like, she is such a pro. I wonder where she's from.
Oh,
She's been doing this forever. You were so in your element. And I'm really glad that our paths crossed at that
yeah.
time because I really look up to you and how you're
Oh,
using one.
I appreciate that.
We won't get too sappy. I'll get us back onto track. But I
No, I
told you,
love it. I'm always down to tell everyone why I'm a fan of the Sam fan club.
I want to know what surprised you the most about working on those Dior installations around the world, because you don't seem like someone who can be pretty, like, shaken pretty easily. So did anything surprise you?
I think that going back to previously asking the questions and being curious, I think there's a perception that people in these higher echelons of the fashion or the museum industry are going to be not approachable. I think fashion has the idea that it's snobby, and it can be for sure, but just how down to earth, accessible, and uniquely helpful everyone on the team was. And I feel like I just did a crash course in figuring out things that I hadn't learned as a self-taught sewer. I didn't know how to make a petticoat. I didn't know how to do the geometric, figuring out how to do an 8-panel skirt versus a half moon versus a 6-panel. That was not in my verbiage. And just the way that certain skill sets were shared, it was so open and way less gatekeepy than I think many people would think.
Ah, I'm glad to hear it. I had a similar experience with the Dior team in Denver where everyone was like, we want the French, it's going to be so scary. But I never had any like bad interaction with anyone in that team. And in fact, they were like bring a kind of energy and happiness, like to
Yeah.
it. At least for me, it calmed me down. So,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I
wow.
think they're very serious. They get their work done, but they have a playfulness. I also love the French work ethic because you get to work. You sit down and you plan what you're going to do for that day and you talk it out as a team, and then you have a coffee and a cigarette sometimes, or go outside, take a fresh air break, and then you are in the studio and you're working until it's done. And it doesn't matter if that's 5 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m. It's just this way of working that you work really hard when you're working and you take breaks and you make sure that you're letting yourself and your brain rest and your hands rest, because it's extremely damaging to your hands.
I'm glad to hear that they were a welcoming group because they are very cool and their collections are awesome.
Yeah.
We have said before that you're a business owner now. You own the business Bustle Worship.
Mhm.
Can you tell us what it's been like to launch your own creative business? And especially in the climate that we are now, having a company that works with museums, how has this journey been?
Business ownership actually came first for me. In 2010, I started Bustle Worship because I was buying vintage furs, relining them, and reselling them as physical objects. And then would go to New York and Boston and do trade shows and pop-ups, and started having private clients that I would fly out and do weddings for them. So I would take a grandmother's coat and cut it into 10 pieces for the bride, her family, or her bridesmaids. And so I feel like, coming from the Midwest, I didn't have any examples in my life of non-traditional business ownership or career paths. So I just had to figure it out at every moment. And as museums came later in my life and in my career, it was interesting to see the way that the skill sets added on to one another. So I started out with a commercial product that I was selling, which has a different ethos around marketing, around reliability, around product sourcing, and then adding in the relationship building, adding in the logistics of bureaucracy or of protocol that museums give. It only added to the language that I now have that make me a better business owner, and also have branched off into not just selling art objects, but then doing logistics planning and freelance work in museums. So I think that all of those skill sets lend to the whole picture, because you have to do all of it when you're an entrepreneur. You have to do every single facet of your business, and you have to make sure that your insurance and your legal and your marketing and your product all are upheld to the ethics, the morals, and the standards that you want to portray as a business person. So I think that now in today's climate, it is actually beneficial to have a commercial business background in addition to the museum work, because now as a freelance person, I'm able to hustle, I'm able to navigate different avenues of revenue, find different projects that may seem out of the norm, because I have this idea that's not just single vision path. It's an all-encompassing idea that entrepreneurial ethos is many things in one path.
I totally agree. One of my business entrepreneurial hot takes is that it's creative, like it's an inherent creative endeavor.
Yes.
And most creative people, myself included, when I was considering business ownership, most creative people don't attribute business ownership to it like being a creative pursuit. This makes a lot of sense to me, because understanding that you had your creative business before being in museums, it makes a lot of sense, because for those listening who haven't worked with Jensina, you are very creative and adaptable and can think on your feet, where people who have been in the museum industry for a long time sometimes have a rigidity
Yes.
that is ingrained because of, oh, there's one way, one right way to do everything, which is not true.
Yeah.
And I find the people who succeed in entrepreneurship in this field are the more creative, adaptable types. Now, I am wondering what advice you have for museum professionals that are thinking of starting something of their own.
The two things that I think are most important in any field, in any moment in your life where you're choosing to jump into something, is that you have to be willing to make mistakes and ask questions and be curious and be the fool. And it's always about networking. It sounds so cheesy and by the book, but you can go to school for a project type or a certain subject, and you can learn everything about that subject. But if you can't talk about that, what you're interested in, and find like-minded people to work with or work for or have as mentors, then you are just all knowledge and no heart. And I think that there has to be an integration in that. And I also think for me, you have to be super willing to take risks rather. It's not easy as to go freelance and to have this moment where there's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of, where's the next project payment coming from? Or can I pay for my own insurance? Or am I a person who needs a schedule? And can I do that in my own life outside of the normal 9 to 5? And there's some people who are not suited for that, and that's okay. But I think you have to be willing to jump off into the pool and say, all right, I'm trying this and I have no idea where the bottom is or where the top is, and I'm just going to figure it out as I go along.
Yeah, thank you for that advice. I feel the same way, that business ownership, especially in this field, but in any field, it takes a lot of courage and self-awareness. And to, like, speaking truth to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to fool yourself something is or isn't for you. You're gonna
Yeah.
know if you bring the heart into it, to your point, which I think is really important, you'll know intuitively what's right and what's not for your path. Speaking of
Mm-hmm.
path, so we've talked a little bit about your pathing to museum field in particular, that it started as a creative practice in your business and having this opportunity to do some mannequinage kind of brought you into the museum world. Do you mind taking us back to the beginning of why you even started that creative business to begin with?
I mean, that is similar to clothing in that it's a cultural marker of the time. I graduated in 2008. There were no jobs at the time of a global market crash. So I was working in restaurants and salons and buying things at Goodwill and just learning how to take them apart and sew them and figuring out on my own how to make clothing and how to work with vintage objects, vintage fur. And I did as much research I could in various ways, as far as taking taxidermy courses, going to natural history museums, buying things and taking apart coats and lighting them on lighting pieces of fibers on fire to figure out, are they synthetic, are they natural? Just learning on my own how to do these things, and then finding a mentor in Denver, which is why I'm in Denver, an 81-year-old Hungarian guy who was a sixth generation furrier. So I figured I needed to have a formal training in order to sell these products, not only as an art piece and a wearable, but to know where they came from, the stories of how they were made, and just be able to really get professional, unique expertise in a way that I wasn't going to learn from a book.
That goes back to the point that you were mentioning earlier about networking and
Mhm.
finding mentors and seeking them out, and that being part of what I agree to your
Mhm.
point of being so critical for success, I think in any field, but
Yeah.
especially this life, that you can learn from a book.
Mm.
You can get a degree, but the real world is nothing that you're going to learn unless you're once you're in it. That's the only
Yes.
way to do it.
Yeah.
Very cool. So through that mentorship,
Mm.
that's that kind of bridge that you got into museum world, into mannequinage and Dior stuff. You're still creative and have your creative business. And in my mind, I think of you, oh, she's a museum person. She's,
Mhm.
but you've
Mm.
like managed exhibitions.
Mm.
And my impression is that you're squarely in that world as well.
Mhm.
Thinking back, what was that unconventional path like when you were taking it? And also, how has it affected how you run your business?
So that path was really scary because I didn't know how or what or why. And again, museums are this holy grail moment. And to get behind the scenes is like seeing behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. And so there was a lot of questioning myself, but also I was really lucky to fall into the team of registrars at the Denver Art Museum. Amazing mentors there, Sarah, Caitlin, Emily, like people who were excited that I was excited to learn and opened up pathways for me that I'm forever grateful for. And from there, then meeting curators, meeting Jane Burke, who was a big mentor of mine and has helped me throughout my career, started me working in exhibitions in Boulder. It was always a moment of one foot in front of the other and continuing with relationships and continuing to ask questions. Not ever this idea of first you get a degree and then you do this and then you do that and then you do that and it's your 30-year career. Like I've never had that option. And I think it was just about finding the thing that drove me that I was interested in and just following the thread. And I think as a business person, that's what you have to do also. You have to find that thing that makes you feel passionate and figure out where your skill sets can be applied to the thing that makes you feel passionate, because you can't go the opposite way. You can't find passion. Maybe you can, but I think that you have to figure out what drives you first and then figure out how to put your whole self into that.
I agree. I think that there are lots of reasons, going back to business ownership, for instance, when we're talking about, oh, someone is considering doing this, because a lot of people in the museum industry right now are.
Mhm.
When you're considering doing this, there's a lot of reasons to start a business, and most of them are not the right reasons.
Yes.
Honestly, I totally support your position on this, that the passion and drive should be there to know that you're going to create something. It's going to be all your own. You're going to be responsible, but also reap the rewards of this hard work and this big responsibility.
And they're long days, and you have to do everything from doing your own taxes, unless you're lucky enough to find someone that you can outsource that to. In the beginning, you have to do every bit. So you have to love it, because being a business owner means you're working 24/7.
Yeah. And even when you're on vacation, even if you
Yeah.
get your out of office message, when you're laying there on vacation at night, you're still thinking like, this
Yes.
project and this project and this project, and I've worked through this point, and then what do I do?
Yes, there is no vacation because your brain is never off, because you're always answering to what the next step is.
And I know for you and me, that suits us pretty well, because
Mhm.
our brain is going to work always, no matter what. But for some
Mhm.
people, that's not sustainable, and that's not a
Yeah.
healthy mindset to be in. So I
Yeah.
recommend to really reflect on, hey, when you're thinking of starting something, just know that's going to happen.
Yes. You can't walk away from it in the same way.
No, there aren't those boundaries that there would be otherwise when you're in the office. I know we're all museum people are really thoughtful and they're
Mhm.
other, but that boundary, I think, of, well, I'm on vacation, it's not there.
Yeah.
One thing I mentioned at the very beginning is you have a new role of being mom, which is very exciting, and I want to
Mhm.
give you so many congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Of course. How has becoming a mom changed your relationship to your work? Both your creative
Mhm.
side of your business and also the kind of museum exhibition side.
Being a freelance person, I think it has changed my relationship in that I'm just not as accessible. I'm not as able to take on projects, and that's just a fact of reality. I started back up with a contract I've been working on, and I have to work at night or on off hours, and I'm exhausted. So I'm just not able to take on as much. I don't have as much bandwidth. But creatively, it hyperdrives me, because I think about when I'm in my studio, I go there for a couple hours versus the languish before times when I would get to be there for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever. I have to go in with a vision, and I have to get done what I need done from a business perspective. If it's a creative day or a day that I can meander through, it's more contemplative, it's more zen-like, because it's this moment of quiet where I'm hand sewing or I'm doing embroidery, and it's, the only moment in my day that I don't have to answer to the time vortex that is parenthood. It is wonderful. I love my baby. I'm pumped to be doing it, and also, the reality is that I have higher priorities and obligations at this point, so I have to really push myself to have a plan when I'm working on projects.
Yeah, it sounds like a forces a clarity on business part just because there's less time, there's less energy to be exploring. Oh, maybe
Mm,
I'll try this. It didn't work out. Try this. It's like that. We need a plan because I have 2 hours instead of 8 hours in my
yes.
day.
But it
Uh,
also it makes me really renewed in my passion for being self-employed, because I want to be present for my child. I want her to be able to be in my studio. I want her to grow up seeing her mom make choices as an entrepreneur, as a freelance person, as a creative, that are, number one, that I am making time for myself because it's important to fill my own bucket, and also that I'm creating this world of handmade, of restoration, of sustainability, of just a relationship to the objects around me that I hope that she sees and feels that there are infinite creative possibilities in her life also, you know?
What a cool opportunity she has to
Mm,
grow up seeing a mom being a business owner in a creative field and in the cultural heritage sector.
mhm.
It's a really unique perspective I think she's gonna get. And what a great bonus of business ownership is that we, for all that work and lack of boundaries and exhaustion and responsibility we have, we do have
Flexibility.
the flexibility to be able to
Mhm,
craft your day in a way that's going to work for you and your family.
mhm. Yes. Yes.
And have you experienced that, or is it a myth?
It does. I think I chose when I was going to stop working for maternity leave, I chose what projects I wanted to do, and moving forward, I will also get to choose how and where I spend my time, and not just what's feasible, but what I want for myself and for my family. And I think the other thing with flexibility is that just in the work that I make, I think it shows that you're not beholden to this idea of buying a commercial object to put on your body. You can find something that excites you, and you can have whimsy and theatrics and curiousness and turn an old shower curtain into a crazy outfit that you wanna wear or an old tapestry into a bag. There is no limits, and you're not beholden to systems, not just as an entrepreneur who's working for themselves, but as a person who's consuming in the world.
That's very rock and roll, I'm going to have to say.
Ooh, I like that.
This segues perfectly. It's as if we planned it perfectly into what I promised everyone who stayed on the end to the end would hear is your hot takes on sustainability in fashion.
Yeah.
So let's lay some groundwork before I start asking the
Mhm.
hot take questions. You've alluded to your creative practice as having a sustainability component. Can you flesh that out a little bit before we start talking about this?
Yeah, so I started out taking fur and turning these objects that were cast off in thrift stores, but that were made at one point with a garment that, pardon me, a pelt that someone had to hunt or clean or make from point A to point Z. And then it also had to be sewn and processed and changed. And that's a skill set that, again, having learned from a master, it's something that takes a lot of hours and takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of specialty machines and materials. And so for me, there is a lot of fabrics and materials that are thrown away. And there's an opportunity to turn them, not just to restore them, but to turn them into something totally new and to pay homage to the original object or the process that took us there. So I make restyled vintage furs, and I also make bags and jackets from vintage tapestries. So all of the materials I use are things that would otherwise end up in the trash.
That's really cool. And I'll say, from someone who makes garments for myself as well, I don't know, garment makers, what do we call sewists, home
So
sewists?
yeah.
No, just like from being in that world that there's a lot of waste
Yes.
in fashion,
Mm,
fast fashion in particular. And so
mhm,
what's really cool about what you do is that these are pieces that you're repurposing that were made so well to begin with. It's not fast fashion that you're
mhm,
using, and you're salvaging something that was actually very expertly and masterfully made,
mhm,
and you're saving it from being in a landfill,
mhm.
which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I want to know, now that we have that foundational knowledge about your business down, what's one truth about sustainability and fashion that people outside the field maybe don't want to hear?
Ooh, there's 2 things that stand out to me. The first goes to the hot button issue of there is no good faux leather or faux fur because they're all made from microplastics. So the production of that fiber, the washing of that fiber are emitting microplastics. Wearing that is putting plastic on your body. So all of these alternatives are greenwashed, and you are supposed to think that these things are better for you, but the reality is that a vintage leather or a vintage fur or a cotton or a linen garment is going to be something that you keep for longer because the fibers and materials are able to sustain long-term wear and use. They're also organic materials that will eventually break down. So I think there's a lot of, as I said, hot button issues around wearing authentic fur or leather. That's my take on it. I think the other one is that fashion is the number 2 most polluting industry only after oil and gas. So you have to look at all of the different shipping, production, the way that secondhand clothes are often dumped in other places and they're left to rot in the desert, in the ocean. They're never going to break down. And, that $5.99 t-shirt that you're getting from Temu is actually so much more because of the cost of labor, of people not getting paid, the shipment that the taxes are not paying. So everything you wear, everything you do with fashion is not frivolous. It's actually very political.
I wasn't aware until I started sewing clothes for myself about different fibers and fabrics in general. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a really big difference to your earlier point between synthetic fibers like polyester is probably the one that people are going to know most offhand, polyester, which is in pretty much everything you buy.
Mm-hmm.
And the natural fibers, linen, silk, cotton, and leathers, real leather and real fur. There's this big divide between the two, and oftentimes, even when you're buying something that's linen, it's like a linen blend or cotton blend with synthetics.
Yeah.
These synthetic fibers are plastic, essentially. Most of the time, it's some kind of polyester. And to your point, with all of the issues around where plastics come from in general, which is oil and gas industry. That is number 1. And number 2, just the fact that they break down. They don't break down in the same way a natural fiber would, but they do shed microplastics.
Yeah.
And people know now how much microplastic we have inside of our body, let alone out in the world. And then when you throw away your Temu shirt that's 100% polyester, it's not breaking. It's staying in the landfill forever.
Yeah.
So this push, at least I'm seeing amongst home sewists, is to use natural fibers as an alternative. It's not going to be something that lasts forever, but we do that on purpose. When it breaks, at least we can fix it. And then once we can't fix it, or all of the offcuts that we're not going to use that we do throw away will eventually biodegrade.
Yeah.
Is at least my amateur perspective as an amateur home sewist.
No, absolutely. And so much of those fibers can be recycled into other garments in ways that also do not produce off-gassing or synthetic recycling matters. So if you recycle linen fibers or cotton fibers, it goes down to a pulp that can then just be rehashed and returned into something else.
Yeah, this is a reframe, I think, especially when we're talking about leather and fur, because at least our generations have grown up with the idea that, wearing real leather and real fur is bad, it's unethical, and the idea that, if you do wear it, you're going to get red paint on you because some people are going to be mad at you. And your take is that potentially that could be a better alternative than some of the synthetic faux furs and hides.
Absolutely. And it's already been made. So to honor the animal and the production value and skill set that it takes to create those things, wear it, recycle it, refashion it, turn it into an heirloom in some other way so that you are continuing to keep it in circulation and not just throwing away something that took a lot of time and effort to be produced.
Which is the double whammy that your creative business side really takes advantage of, is using these natural fibers, but using something that's already been created. Because there is a difference between choosing to source new furs that are newly created today versus furs that already exist and are just going to be in the trash anyway, unless they're repurposed. Since this is Museum Backstage, is there a way that we can have a last point about museums and sustainability?
I think that there's a big push now, especially in fashion exhibitions, for museums to be more cognizant of how much and what they're using, especially with shipping. I think there is a ton of waste, unfortunately, in museums, just with ferrying objects across the ocean, across the state. The way that a lot of mounts are single use or mannequinage objects are single use. I think that there's a lot of great pushes within museums who are trying really hard to be more sustainable.
I totally agree. I'm seeing more of a, at least talking and a push towards reusing materials that had been for another mount and like
Yes.
properly cleaning them, because there's, to our point earlier, like there's this impression there's one way to do things and you have clean like materials every time and you can't cross into one.
Yeah.
And now I think there's a bit more of a relaxation about, okay, yeah, maybe that's a best practice in one perspective from the word best practice. But when we're talking about sustainability, especially reusing archival materials that are still fine, they've just touched them. Well, properly cleaning them. It's at least one way that I've seen collections people kind of problem. But when we're talking to your point about loans that are going internationally, transporting, having couriers, which are people who travel with these pieces, I'm seeing a lot of workshops and sessions around sustainability in transport in that bigger conversation. We can make a note to link a couple more recent resources to that effect. Because we're still figuring it out.
It is evolving. I think after many years of, like you said, best practice or standards being very by the book, we're opening up in the museum field to new ways of thinking and being.
This is a great moment in museums that we're starting to diversify our input into what best practice even means, who gets to define it, and what it means moving forward, which is a better place to end this conversation.
I love talking to you about this, and I'm grateful that we've had the experience as friends, colleagues, coworkers in so many ways to get to hash this out.
Likewise. So tell us, where can listeners find and engage with you and your business?
So I have my website, bustleworshipdesigns.com, which has both my museum background CV, some of my articles or thesis work, photography exhibitions, and then also visuals on my creative work there. I'm taking an Instagram break, but I'm coming back soon because it is market season. Being away for the winter with some family and traveling, I'm not going to be super present in the physical realm of markets this year, but I am creating a lot and have a lot of backstock that will be released in the future. So look for me on Instagram as Bustle Worship. I'm coming back.
We're glad to hear it. I can't wait for some drops because your stuff is so cool. It is like nothing else out there. It's really unique. And just so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. It's fun. It should be fun, right?
That's right. We should love what we wear and be proud of it. Thank you so much, Jensina, for being
Thank you.
fabulous guest.
All your wonderful questions.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet of you. Everyone, that is a wrap. Thank you for taking us backstage today, Jensina, and we'll see you all for the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Museum Backstage podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.